Hey friends, I recently noticed that almost 80% of viewers who enjoy these videos haven't subscribed yet. If you like the stories and want to see more, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement makes a huge difference and helps these stories reach more people. Thanks so much for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know. You don't last 15 years in the security business by spooking easy. You see shadows, you hear noises. It's part of the job. I'd seen it all, or so I thought, until I took the Birchwood assignment. My company landed a temporary contract for the Birchwood Memorial Hospital. Calling it a hospital was generous. It was a decommissioned government sanatorium, shut down under a cloud of rumors back in the 80s. To call its location remote is an understatement. It's a crumbling brick fortress sunk in the heart of a state forest. A good 40-minute drive from the nearest flicker of town lights. No neighbors, no passing traffic, just miles of dense, dark woods pressing in from all sides. Thanks to my seniority, I had my pick of shifts. I was a days and evenings guy, always had my weekends. But a few weeks into the Birchwood contract, we had a serious problem. Nobody would stay on the weekend overnight shift. Guards would work one Friday night, call in sick on Saturday, and outright quit by Monday. The official line was, personal reasons. But the look in their eyes told a different story. The shift was solo, and every guard is armed. But that didn't seem to matter. My supervisor came to me, hat in hand. They needed a steady hand to hold the fort, just for a few weekends, until they could find some new hires desperate enough to take it. The pay was triple time. Hazard pay, they called it, blaming the isolation. I could have said no. I should have said no. But my daughter's college fund was looking thin, and those medical bills for her asthma were piling up. So I said yes. The first 2 Saturdays were dead quiet. Eerily so. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the building itself is holding its breath. I did my rounds, checked the cameras, and wrote my reports. It was boring, which in our line of work is the best case scenario. I started to think the other guards just had weak nerves. But the third weekend is why I'm telling you this story now. It was a cold Saturday, pushing 2 a.m. There was no storm, just a deep, freezing fog that clung to the windows. I was in the ground floor security office, a small room that felt more like a tomb. I had the lights off, the glow from the bank of 3 CCTV monitors casting the only light. I'd given up on my phone, the silence too absolute for distractions. I got up to stretch my legs, my spine cracking in the quiet. I walked over to the main monitor, my eyes scanning the feeds, the long, dark hallways, the empty cafeteria, the derelict courtyard camera, its view choked with fog. And that's when I saw it. On the courtyard feed, the fog shifted for just a second, and there they were, 7 figures, standing in a perfect, silent circle in the overgrown grass. They weren't moving. They were just waiting. My name is Stephen Bennett. I've been in security for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. That was before I accepted the triple time shift at Birchwood. They called it hazard pay for the remoteness. They were wrong. 15 years teaches you to trust your gut, but also to verify. My gut was a tight knot. My training said it was a trick of the fog, a glitch in the ancient DVR system that should have been retired a decade ago. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath fogging slightly in the chilled air of the office. The courtyard feed was static again, a grainy wall of gray mist. 7 figures. Impossible. I ran a system diagnostic with a few sharp keystrokes. All feeds reported nominal. I toggled to the camera's internal log. No signal loss, no reboots. My professional mind scrambled for an anchor. Deer in a perfect, silent circle. Teenagers out here? It was less likely than a lightning strike in this freezing fog. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was attentive. I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to exhale, the sound unnaturally loud. Protocol dictated I investigate. My hand went to the butt of my sidearm, bolstered securely on my hip. The cool, textured grip was a familiar comfort, a piece of the real world. But I didn't move. Not yet. Instead, my mind flashed back to 3 weeks ago, to the briefing that started this. My supervisor, Dave, had pulled me aside. "Steve, we've got a situation with the Birchwood contract." He looked tired. "We can't keep a soul on the weekend overnight. They do one shift and ghost us, mumbling about bad vibes and noises in the walls." He'd scoffed, and I'd scoffed with him. Amateurs. This job isn't for the easily spooked. Then he'd made the offer. Triple time. 4 Saturday nights. "It's just until we find some new bodies," he'd said. "We need a steady hand out there." I could have said no. I had seniority. I had my comfortable, predictable life. But then I pictured my daughter, Sarah. Her face lit up as she talked about college tours. I heard the faint wheeze in her breath after a soccer game, a sound that never failed to send a spike of fear through me. The extra money wasn't for a new car or a vacation. It was for her future, for her health. So I said yes. The first Saturday, I'd approached Birchwood with a professional's disdain for superstition. It was exactly as described. A crumbling brick monolith, a relic from an uglier time, sinking into the neglect of the state forest. The 40-minute drive felt like entering another, quieter world. The silence when I stepped out of my truck was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't peaceful. It was absorbent, swallowing sound whole. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, damp plaster, and beneath it, the faint, sweetish odor of decay. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing peeling wallpaper and long, shadow-haunted corridors. I did my rounds by the book, my footsteps echoing in the profound stillness. I checked doors, noted the positions of old gurneys and broken furniture, and tried to ignore the feeling that the forest outside was pressing its face against the windows, watching me. I spent the night in the security office, the glow of the monitors my only company. It was boring, and I was grateful for it. The second Saturday was a carbon copy. The same heavy silence, the same oppressive feeling of being the only living thing for miles. I started to feel a smug certainty. The other guards were simply weak. They let the atmosphere get to them. I was a professional. This was just a building. But now, on the third weekend, that certainty was gone, replaced by a cold, trickling dread. On the monitor, the courtyard was still a void. I had to know. Pushing my chair back, its legs screeching in the silence, I stood. I drew my flashlight, the solid weight of it a small comfort. I wouldn't draw my weapon. Not yet. That was a line, but I was going to look. I placed my hand on the cold metal doorknob of the security office. From the bank of speakers set into the ceiling, the building's internal comms system, dead and silent since my first tour, a low electrical hum sputtered to life. It lasted only a second before cutting out, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow worse than before. My hand froze on the knob. Every nerve was screaming. This was no glitch. This was no trick of the light. The building was awake, and it knew I was here. My hand jerked back from the doorknob as if it were red hot. The low hum from the intercom had been brief, but it had severed the last thread of my professional composure. The silence that rushed back in was no longer empty. It was a held breath. The building was watching. I stood there, rooted for a full minute, my own breath shallow in my throat. The urge to investigate the courtyard was gone, replaced by a primal need to fortify my position. I engaged the heavy deadbolt on the office door, the solid thunk, a tiny bastion of sanity. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Get a grip, Bennett. You're a professional. Assess. I retreated to the chair, my eyes glued to the bank of monitors. The courtyard feed remained a placid wall of gray. Hallway 1 West, empty. The old cafeteria, empty. I toggled through every camera angle, my knuckles white. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. But something had. The context was gone. The boring silence of the first 2 weeks was now a predatory quiet. Every shadow in the periphery of the camera feeds seemed to pulse with potential. I spent the rest of that third shift in a state of high alert, jumping at the creak of the old building settling and the whisper of the wind outside. The 7 figures did not reappear. The intercom remained silent, but the memory of them, that perfect, silent circle, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. By the time the first hint of dawn grayed the windows, I was exhausted, strung out on adrenaline and caffeine. The week passed in a blur of normalcy that felt like a lie. I did my day shifts at a corporate office, the buzz of fluorescent lights and people a stark contrast to Birchwood's tomb. I tried to write it off. A waking dream. A stress-induced hallucination. But the image was too precise, too coordinated. It felt real. Driving out for the 4th and final Saturday, the dread was a physical weight in my stomach. The weather had turned. A thick, cold fog had rolled in from the woods, swallowing the trees and coating my windshield in a fine mist. The world had shrunk to the 20 feet of asphalt visible in my headlights. Birchwood emerged from the gloom not as a building, but as a darker patch of fog, a bruise on the landscape. Inside, the fog seemed to have seeped through the bricks. The air was colder, damper. I went through my routines with a robotic precision, my senses screaming, checking camera feeds, testing the door locks. The intercom system, when I tapped the mic, gave only a dull, dead thud, as it should shut out. But the small anomalies started almost immediately. On my first round, I clearly remembered closing the door to the linen closet on the second floor, pushing it until the latch clicked. On my return pass, 40 minutes later, it stood open a precise 6 inches. My flashlight beam pierced the empty, shelf-lined darkness within. Nothing. Later, stationed in the office, a flicker of movement on the edge of camera 4, main stairwell, east wing, made me jerk my head. Just a shadow, long and distorted by the angle. But for a second, it didn't look like a shadow cast by the banister. It looked like the silhouette of a man, tall and thin, before it resolved back into mundane shapes. My pulse hammered in my ears. The clock on the wall crawled past 2:00 a.m. The fog outside was a solid white void. I was a live wire, every nerve ending exposed. At 2:17 a.m., my eyes, as if drawn by a magnet, went to the courtyard feed. The fog was impenetrable. I stared, waiting for a shift, a break. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. See? You're letting it get to you. It was just... And then it happened. The fog on the monitor didn't just part. It seemed to recoil, pulling back from the center of the courtyard in a perfect, swift circle. And in that suddenly clear space, they were there. The 7 figures, standing in the same perfect, silent circle, utterly motionless. Dark, humanoid shapes against the pale, wet grass. They were back. This time, I didn't hesitate. I was out of my chair in a second, not with panic, but with a furious, desperate need for proof. I didn't run to the window. I strode, my boots pounding on the linoleum. I fumbled with the latch on the reinforced window next to the door, shoving it open, the cold, foggy air blasting into the room. I leaned out, my high-power flashlight stabbing into the gloom. The beam, a solid bar of white, cut through the fog, illuminating the overgrown courtyard, the skeletal remains of a forgotten bench, the wet black branches of the trees beyond. It was empty. Completely, utterly empty. No, I breathed, the word a cloud in the frigid air. I swept the light back and forth. Nothing. No figures. No footprints. No sign that anything had ever been there. I slammed the window shut, the vibration rattling the glass, and sprinted back to the monitors. My heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I stared at the courtyard feed. It showed an empty yard. The fog had closed back in, as if it had never opened at all. I collapsed into the chair, my body trembling. I put my head in my hands, trying to slow my breathing. A trick of the fog. A complex glitch in the old DVR system, replaying a corrupted image. My own tired, stressed-out eyes, projecting fears onto the static. It had to be. I looked up at the monitor, at the peaceful, gray and empty courtyard. It was just a trick of the light I whispered to the silent, listening room. The lie tasted like ash on my tongue. A week later, I walked into Birchwood, knowing I had seen something real. Denial was a luxury I could no longer afford. The circle of figures was not a glitch or a hallucination. It was a phenomenon. What I didn't know was that it had seen me too, and it knew things it shouldn't. My final Saturday shift began with a new ritual, a conscious steeling of my nerves in the parking lot. The fog was gone, replaced by a clear, cold night that made the stars look like shards of ice. It offered no comfort. The clarity felt exposing. I entered the building with my flashlight in one hand, my radio in the other, my head on a swivel. Every shadow was a threat, every distant creak a footstep. I did my initial rounds at a brisk, efficient pace, my senses draped raw. I spoke my observations aloud, just to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. West Wing, clear. Stairwell B, clear. The building drank my words, leaving a deeper silence in their wake. Back in the security office, I locked the door and tried to settle in. The clock read 1:14 a.m. The witching hour was approaching. It started at 1:37. A low, electrical hum sputtered through the room, the same sound I'd heard the week before. But this time, it didn't die. It stabilized into a steady, 60-cycle drone that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. The small wire mesh grill of the intercom speaker, set into the wall above the door, was now live. My blood ran cold. I stared at it, frozen in my chair. Then, a voice, not a broadcast, but a whisper, synthesized and distorted, yet horribly precise. It crackled from the grill, each word stretched and fractured. Just a trick of the light, my own words. The desperate lie I'd whispered to myself last week were thrown back at me. A jolt of pure, undiluted terror locked my joints. This wasn't a residual image. This was a response. "It's not real," the intercom whispered, echoing the thought currently screaming in my mind. I shot to my feet, my chair screeching backwards. "Who is this?" I yelled at the grill, my voice cracking. "This is private property." The whisper ignored me, a private conversation with my own psyche. "Need to get out of here." Panic began to curdle into something worse, a profound, violating horror. It was in my head, plucking thoughts like strings. I grabbed my radio, my thumb mashing the transmit button. "Base, this is Bennett at Birchwood. I have a..." Sarah's breathing is shallow tonight. The whisper was calm, clinical. The world stopped. The radio slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Sarah, my daughter. Her asthma, the nebulizer by her bed, the way my wife would text me updates on her breathing when I was on shift. It was my deepest, most private fear. A secret I'd told no one at work. A vulnerability I carried with me every day. This thing, this presence, wasn't just showing me things. It was rifling through my soul. I stumbled back to the desk, my eyes darting to the DVR monitors, my last tether to reality. What I saw shattered it completely. The 7 figures were back, but they were no longer in the courtyard. They were inside. On every camera feed, the main hall, the second-floor landing, the east wing corridor, they stood, their forms composed of shifting static and shadow. And on camera 3, the one for the main hall just outside this office, their faces were pressed against the lens. Not faces, but swirling vortices of digital noise, straining to manifest. A loud final thump echoed from the hallway, and the main power died. The room plunged into absolute blackness. The monitors winked out. The hum of the computers ceased. I held my breath, waiting for the dim orange glow of the emergency lights. They did not come. Instead, a faint, sickly green light began to pulse from the intercom speaker grill in the wall. Then, I heard it from the hallway. The same pulsating glow emanating from the other speakers mounted down the hall, creating a ghastly, dotted path into the consuming darkness. A new sound emerged, not from one speaker, but from all of them at once. A chorus of those same distorted whispers, layering over one another, rising in volume. They coalesced, the words syncing up into a single clear and chillingly calm command that filled the black void around me. We just want you to watch. As the final brunt hung in the air, the 3 monitor screens on the desk flashed to life simultaneously, blindingly white. The light seared my dark, adapted eyes. When my vision cleared, all 3 screens showed the same image. From a camera I knew didn't exist, a point-of-view shot from the hallway, looking directly at the security office door. And standing shoulder to shoulder, completely blocking the exit, were the 7 figures. No longer static or distant. They were here. From the other side of the office door, I heard the deadbolt I had so carefully engaged begin to turn. The metallic click-clunk of the mechanism was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The doorknob itself began to rotate, slowly, deliberately. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to know the truth, no matter how inconvenient. Only people who would cover up a place like Birchwood, hiding its history to avoid liability, would let something like this go on. Don't be like them. Subscribe if you stand for exposing the past, no matter how dark. And if you think the forgotten deserve to be remembered, comments like this: "The watch never ends," or "I would never have gone back." There is only run. The turning doorknob was a death sentence. I was trapped. The door was the only exit, and they were on the other side. My eyes, wide with primal terror, darted around the pitch-black room, lit only by the pulsating green glow of the intercom. The window. The damned, reinforced window I'd looked out of just nights before. I didn't think. I acted. Grabbing my heavy metal flashlight like a club, I lunged at the window, swinging with all my strength. The glass was thick, but the frame was old and rotten. The first blow sent a spider web of cracks through the pane. The second shattered it. A gale of freezing night air rushed in, the sound of breaking glass impossibly loud. I didn't feel the shards that sliced into my hands and forearms. I only felt the opening, I hauled myself through the jagged opening, my jacket catching and tearing, and tumbled onto the cold, wet grass of the side lawn. I was out. Scrambling to my feet, I didn't look back at the office door. I just ran. My sprint for the main entrance around the front of the building was a blind stumble through a sensory nightmare. The pulsating green light from the hallway speakers bled out through the building's windows, painting the path in sickly, strobing hues. The whispers followed me, no longer just in my head, but broadcast into the night. Left. A speaker by an upper window hissed. I instinctively swerved left, only to find my path blocked by a fallen tree limb. Too slow. Another mocked from a ground floor vent. Cold, unseen fingers brushed against the back of my jacket. A sensation like walking through cobwebs made of ice. I screamed and batted at nothing, my pace never faltering. I could hear them now, not just whispers, but footsteps, multiple, heavy and wet sounding, keeping pace with me just inside the building, shadowing my desperate flight. The main entrance came into view, its large wooden doors a promise of escape. I hit the steps 2 at a time, my bleeding hands slipping on the iron railing. The doors were secured by 2 thick, horizontal bolts. I threw my weight against the first, shoving it back with a rusty shriek. The whispers around me rose to a crescendo, a cacophony of distorted, eager static. Stay. Watch. As I slammed the second bolt home, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Down the green-lit hallway, a mass of shifting darkness was coalescing, moving toward me with a terrible, deliberate speed. I wrenched the heavy door open and burst out into the cold, clean night air. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. The whispers cut off mid-syllable. The green lights in the hallway behind me winked out, plunging the interior back into an abyssal black. I stood on the steps, gasping, my breath pluming in the air, my entire body trembling. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. I turned, slowly, to look back at the building I had just escaped. The security office window on the second floor, the one I had shattered, was intact. Not just closed, but perfectly whole, as if I had never touched it. And standing behind the glass, lined up and looking down at me, were the 7 figures. Their hands were pressed flat against the pane, not in anger, but in a gesture of observation, a silent, eternal watch. They had never even left the office. I ran to my truck, fumbling the keys 3 times before I got the door open. I didn't stop driving until my house was in sight. I never went back. I called Dave the next morning, my voice shaking, and told him I was cracking up. I cited isolation psychosis. To my relief, he was almost cheerful about it. Happens to the best of us, Steve. We'll process you out. Take some time. They were glad to be rid of the problem, and I was glad to be rid of them. A week later, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail. My final paycheck. I tore it open, and a small, stiff rectangle fluttered out and spun onto the kitchen table. It was a photograph, sepia-toned and cracked with age. It showed 7 men in antiquated, orderly uniforms, standing in a perfect circle in the overgrown courtyard of Birchwood. Their faces were stern, vacant. I knew them instantly. My eyes were drawn to the edge of the photograph. There, blurred by motion, as if he had just stumbled into the frame, was an 8th figure. He was dressed in a modern security uniform. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. The face was mine. I stared at the photograph, the world tilting around me. It wasn't over. I hadn't escaped. I had simply been processed, added to the collection. The watch had not ended. It had just changed venues. And I knew, with a certainty that froze the very core of me, that they were still watching. Paul Lamb here. I guard a glass palace in Irvine where nothing ever happens. Or so I thought, until I met the man who didn't follow the rules of reality. The Apex Tower is the opposite of creepy. It's all polished granite, ambient lighting, and the constant, low hum of climate control and server racks. My biggest enemy is boredom. My shift is from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my world consists of the glow of CCTV monitors and the silent, empty corridors of a 20-story monument to corporate finance. I've been doing this for 3 years. I know the night janitor's schedule, the sound the elevators make when they're running a self-diagnostic, and the exact pattern of city lights visible from the rooftop access door. It's predictable, safe, or it was. My least favorite part of the night is the parking garage patrol. The building might be a beacon of light, but the garage is a 4-level concrete tomb sunk into the earth. It's always 10 degrees colder down there, and the air smells of damp concrete and exhaust fumes that never fully dissipate. Your footsteps echo in a way they don't upstairs, and the motion sensor lights create more pockets of shifting shadow than they eliminate. It was on one of these mind-numbing patrols, around 1:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, that I saw him. I was on P2, my flashlight beam sweeping across the rows of sedans and SUVs. The beam caught a flicker of movement between a BMW and a Tesla. I stopped. A man. He was well-dressed in a dark, tailored suit, maybe in his 50s. He wasn't trying door handles. He wasn't looking for valuables. He was pantomiming. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a damaged video file skipping frames. He would stand by a car door, his hands gripping an invisible steering wheel, his body swaying as if taking a sharp turn. Then he'd shuffle to the next car, lean down and stare intently into the passenger side window at nothing. Absolutely nothing. "Hey," I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. "Security, this area is closed. I need you to identify yourself." The man froze mid-mime, one hand still hovering over a phantom gear shift. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face me. His face was blank, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then, his features rearranged themselves into a wide, vacant smile that didn't touch his eyes. It was a plastic, joyless expression. He gave me a slow, deliberate, almost regal wave, as if acknowledging a subject. Then he turned back to the Tesla, and resumed his silent, frantic miming of a drive, his feet shuffling on the concrete. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't a drunk. This wasn't a vagrant. This was something else entirely. Sir, I'm not going to ask you again. You need to leave the premises now, or I will contact the police. He ignored me completely. It was as if I'd ceased to exist the moment he turned his back. The only sound was the soft scuff of his dress shoes and the ragged sound of my own breathing. Protocol said to detain him. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of the garage. I backpedaled, keeping my light on him until I reached the stairwell door. I slammed through it, the bang echoing up and down the concrete stairwell, and took the steps 2 at a time back up to the lobby level. My heart was hammering. I needed to call this in. Get a unit over here. I burst into the pristine, silent lobby, the sudden brightness disorienting. I keyed my radio. Base, this is Lum Lamb at Apex Tower. I've got a code 22 in the P2 garage. Male subject, non-responsive and behaving erratically. Request. My radio crackled, cutting me off. But it wasn't dispatch. A voice came through, fragmented and glitched, layered with static. It was his voice, but stretched and broken. Destination: Maple Street, 1954. A pause, then a burst of digital noise. Jenny is waiting. Be home. For supper. The transmission cut out. I stood there, frozen, in the middle of the empty multi-million-dollar lobby. Maple Street, 1954. The names and addresses were nonsensical, ripped from another time. My eyes drifted to the large security monitor mounted behind the reception desk, which cycled through the garage camera feeds. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as the feed for P2 showed the man. He was no longer miming. He was standing perfectly still in the exact center of the concrete lane, his back to the camera. Then, as if he knew I was watching, his head began to turn. Not his body, just his head, rotating a full 180 degrees until he was staring directly up into the camera lens. His face was a perfect, emotionless mask. His eyes were black pools, and his vacant smile was fixed in place. He was no longer in the garage. He was in the lobby feed, standing in the exact spot where I was standing, staring up at me from the monitor. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the empty space. There was no one there, but on the screen, he remained, his gaze locked on mine, a silent, impossible glitch in the heart of my safe, predictable world. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a vandal. He was a glitch in the world, and he wanted to play. My breath hitched. The man on the monitor, staring up from the empty lobby. I fumbled for the master control panel, my fingers slipping on the touchscreen. I initiated a full building lockdown. A series of satisfying electronic clunks should have echoed from the main doors. Instead, I heard a stuttering, misfiring sound. Click, click, zzzt, as the locks engaged, disengaged, and failed. The status screen flashed red errors. He was in the system. I was alone in a glass box with all the doors unlocked. My radio crackled to life again. That same fragmented, childlike voice. You're It. I backed away from the reception desk, my eyes darting between the main entrance and the stairwell door that led down to the garage, and my car. The garage was a trap, but it was also my only way out. I had to risk it. I sprinted for the stairwell door, shoving it open and plunging into the concrete echo chamber. The door swung shut behind me, its boom reverberating up and down the shaft. I stood there for a second, listening, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when I heard it. From the floor above me. P3. Light, skipping footsteps. Not the measured tread of an adult, but the playful, erratic patter of a child. Tap, 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 tap. Then a pause. I froze, pressed against the cold wall. The footsteps started again, closer now, moving toward the top of the stairwell. A voice rang out, clear and full of gleeful malice, echoing from the hard surfaces. Ready or not, here I come. That was all the motivation I needed. I took the steps down to P2, 2, and 3 at a time, my own footsteps thunderous in the enclosed space. I burst through the door into the garage, the damp, cold air hitting me like a wall. I glanced at the security camera mounted near the entrance. The LED light was off. I looked at the next one down the row, also dark. I pulled out my handheld monitor. Every single garage camera feed was frozen on the same image. An empty section of P1 from hours ago, before any of this started. He had blinded me. The garage was his playground, and I was the prize. My car was 30 yards away. It felt like a mile. I ran, my keys already in my hand, my head on a swivel. The only sound was the frantic jangling of the keys and the ragged saw of my breath. I was 10 feet from my car, my thumb poised over the fob's unlock button. When I looked up, he was standing on the hood of a silver sedan parked directly across from my SUV. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his body vibrating at an impossible high frequency, like a pencil scribbling on paper. His form was a blur, a human-shaped distortion in the air. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, he was just gone. Not a blur of movement, not a retreat into shadows. He ceased to exist. I didn't process it. I didn't have time. I hit the unlock button, the chirp and flash of my lights a shocking normality. I wrenched the door open, and that's when I heard it. Right behind my left ear, so close I could feel the displacement of air. A warm, moist breath, and the sound of two light, playful, skipping footsteps on the concrete. Tap, tap. I didn't scream. I didn't turn. A survival instinct deeper than curiosity took over. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and hit the locks. I didn't look into the rearview mirror. I didn't look anywhere but forward. I started the engine, slammed the car into reverse, and then drive, screeching up the ramps and out into the blessed, silent and empty Irvine night. The police found nothing, of course. They wrote it up as a prank by a sophisticated hacker, though they couldn't explain the failed locks or the corrupted footage. The case went cold. But the next morning, my supervisor called me. Tenants on P2 were complaining. One guy's GPS was stuck displaying routes from 1978. A woman's satellite radio was permanently tuned to a static-filled station that only played a tinny, looped version of Ring Around the Rosie. And 3 separate people had found faint, greasy handprints on their driver's side windows. Small, adult-sized handprints on the inside of the glass. I quit that day. I never set foot in the Apex Tower again. But sometimes, when I'm walking down a quiet street at night and I hear a child skipping rope, or I catch a flicker of movement in a shop window that doesn't match my own, I feel it. That cold, greasy fear. Not of a man, but of the thing that wore a man's skin. A thing that doesn't follow the rules. A thing that just wants to play. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that the game isn't over. He's just waiting for me to be found again. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to know the truth, no matter how strange. Only people who ignore the glitches in the system, who pretend everything is fine for the sake of profit, would let something like this go on. Don't be like the building management. Subscribe if you stand for questioning reality. And if you think some games should never be played, comments like this, "He's still it," or "I believe in safe spaces." My trainer, Joe, said it was always a raccoon. It was never a raccoon. My name is Jason Robertson, and my first night was my last. Joseph P. Goins was a man carved from cynicism and cheap coffee. A former cop with 20 years on the job, he now spent his nights babysitting empty buildings and breaking in rookies like me. I was 1 week out of training, my uniform still stiff, eager to prove I had the right stuff. Joe's entire philosophy could be summed up in one phrase, delivered in a gravelly baritone. Don't go looking for trouble, kid. It's almost always a raccoon. We were parked in the company SUV, eating lukewarm pizza, when the call came in. Dispatch, a bored female voice, crackled over the radio. Unit 7, we have a tripped motion sensor at the West Side Medical Clinic on Birchwood. Alarm company reports no forced entry. Please respond for a premises check. Joe let out a long-suffering sigh, tossing his crust back into the box. See? Raccoon. Probably got in through the HVAC. Waste of gas. He keyed the radio. Copy, dispatch. Unit 7 en route. He started the engine and looked at me. Rule number 1, Robertson. 99% of this job is showing up, confirming nothing's on fire, and going back to your pizza. Don't get excited. The West Side Medical Clinic was the picture of suburban normalcy. A single-story, beige brick building nestled in a quiet plaza, flanked by a closed-up dry cleaner and a 24-hour gym. The night was clear and still. It was, as Joe had promised, utterly boring. The front door was securely locked. No broken glass, no jimmied frames. Joe grunted, unsurprised, and used the master key from the lockbox. The door swung open into a dark waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and lemon-scented cleaner. All right, standard sweep, Joe said, his flashlight cutting a practiced beam through the gloom. Stick close. Call out what you see. We moved in tandem. Waiting room, empty. Front desk, clear. Main corridor, deserted. Our flashlights illuminated posters of anatomical diagrams and smiling, generic families. The only sound was the hum of a medical refrigerator from behind a closed door and the soft scuff of our boots on the commercial carpet. "See?" Joe muttered, his voice low. "Nothing. A faulty sensor, a draft, a raccoon." He seemed almost disappointed. I suppose there was no varmint to shoo out. We completed the loop, ending back near the front. "Well, that's that," Joe said, reaching for his radio to call in the all clear. "Shouldn't we check the alarm panel?" I asked, the training manual fresh in my mind, to see which sensor was tripped. Joe gave me a look that was part annoyance, part grudging respect for following procedure. "Fine, but it's gonna say main corridor and it's gonna be a glitch." He led me to a small utility closet where the main alarm panel was mounted, its LED display a soft green. He tapped a few buttons, scrolling through the log. His casual demeanor evaporated. His finger stopped, hovering over the screen. "Huh. What?" I asked, leaning in. "It's not the main corridor," he said, his voice losing its gravelly boredom. "It's not a general zone at all." He pointed at the screen. The log entry was clear and specific. "Motion. Exam room. 02:17 a.m. One room. Isolated." A faint prickle, the first touch of unease, ran down my spine. Joe's face was a mask of professional curiosity, but I saw the slight tightening around his eyes. "Probably just a faulty unit," he said, but the certainty was gone from his voice. "Let's take a quick look. Seal the deal." We moved down the hall to exam 3. The door was closed. Joe reached for the handle and turned. It didn't budge. He frowned, trying again with more force. Nothing. He shone his light along the doorframe. Locked. Then he knelt, peering through the keyhole. He went, very still. "What is it?" I whispered. He stood up slowly, his face now completely serious. "It's locked from the inside." The words hung in the antiseptic air. I stared at the door, then up at the drop ceiling. The tiles were all perfectly in place, undisturbed. I looked at the vent near the floor. It was a small rectangular grate, far too tiny for a person. Or even a raccoon. There was no other way in or out. Joe and I looked at each other. The professional confusion in his eyes was rapidly being eclipsed by something I'd never seen in him before. A deep, unsettling alarm. The hallway, which had felt so mundane moments before, now felt like a tunnel, and the locked door of exam 3 was a sealed tomb, hiding a secret that had no right to be there. When we forced that door open, the cold that hit us wasn't from an AC unit. It was the cold of a tomb, and it had my name on it. Joe didn't hesitate. The locked door was a challenge to his authority, a wrinkle in his predictable world. "Stand back," he grunted, positioning his shoulder against the wood, right next to the lock. He was a big man, and with a single powerful lunge, there was a loud crack as the bolt tore through the frame. The door swung inward, and a wave of frigid, stale air washed over us, carrying a faint, coppery smell like old pennies. The room was pristine and empty. Harsh, white light from the hallway spilled across a spotless linoleum floor, a stainless steel sink, and a padded examination table covered in crisp white paper. There were no hiding places, no raccoons, no intruders. But there was a file. A single letter-sized manila folder sat perfectly centered on the examination table. It was the only object in the room that wasn't bolted down. From where I stood, I could see a white tab on its edge. My eyes, sharpened by adrenaline, focused on it. It was my name, typed, Jason A. Robertson. The world tilted. The air vanished from my lungs. "Joe," I croaked, my voice strangled. Joe saw it too. His face, set in a scowl of forced rationality, went slack with confusion. "What in the hell?" I walked forward, my legs moving on autopilot. The cold in the room seemed to cling to me, seeping through my uniform. I reached out a trembling hand and picked up the folder. It felt unnaturally heavy. "Robertson, don't," Joe started, but it was too late. I opened it. Inside was a standard patient intake form, filled out with impeccable machine-printed detail. My full name, my date of birth, my height and weight, my social security number. It was all there. Every private detail laid bare. My eyes, burning with terror, scanned down to the bottom of the page. There was no doctor's signature. Instead, scrawled in a frantic, looping hand using what looked like red ink or blood, was a single, horrifying line. Diagnosis, cause of death, right. And below that, an appointment date and time. Next, Tuesday, 3:15 a.m., a high-pitched whine started in my ears. The folder slipped from my numb fingers, spilling its contents onto the floor. Joe snatched the form up, his eyes darting across it. His face paled, but his training kicked in. "This is a prank," he barked, his voice too loud in the small room. "A sick, targeted prank. Someone's messing with you, kid. An ex, a disgruntled coworker." He was trying to convince himself as much as me. He keyed his radio, his thumb mashing the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. We have a 1099 at the West Side Clinic. We've got a possible trespasser and a targeted threat against my partner. We need backup and police now." The radio didn't crackle. It erupted. A blast of white noise static screamed from the speaker, so loud and painful we both flinched. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, a new voice came through. It was calm, professional, and unnervingly clear. A doctor's voice, the kind you'd trust with bad news. "The patient is ready for his assessment." The words hung in the frigid air. Then, with a definitive click, the overhead lights in Exam 3 went out. We were plunged into an absolute suffocating blackness, the kind of dark that feels solid, that presses against your eyeballs. From behind us, the door we had just broken slammed shut with terrifying force. The sound of the shattered lock mechanism grinding back into place was unmistakable. Click-clunk. We were trapped, sealed inside the tomb-cold darkness with my diagnosis. In the perfect dark, you stop seeing with your eyes. You feel, and I felt a gloved hand brush my neck. Panic is a quiet thing at first. It's the cessation of breath, the freezing of the blood. Then it erupts. "The door! Find the door!" Joe roared, his voice a strangled thing in the absolute black. I heard him blunder into the examination table, cursing. I was pinned to the spot, my back against the cold wall, my hands patting frantically at smooth, featureless drywall. The geometry of the room, so simple moments before, had become a labyrinth. The door had vanished. I can't find the handle," I gasped. That's when the other sounds began. Not from outside the room, but from within it. With us. The soft, crisp rustle of starched cloth close to my right ear. The metallic squeak of a wheeled stool shifting weight. The smell in the room changed, the coppery tang vanishing, replaced by the overpowering, sweet chemically reek of antiseptic. So strong it made my eyes water even in the darkness. "Who's there?" Joe yelled, his voice cracking. He'd drawn his pistol. I heard the distinctive slide of the holster's retention strap. "Identify yourself." There was no answer, only the rustling, the squeaking. Then I felt it. A touch. On the back of my neck, just above my collar. It was cold, slick, the unmistakable texture of a latex glove. A single cold finger traced a slow, deliberate line from the base of my skull down my spine. I didn't scream. The sound that came out of me was a choked animal whimper of pure, unadulterated terror. My bladder let go, warmth spreading through my uniform pants, a final, humiliating loss of control. That whimper broke the spell for Joe. He didn't shoot. He didn't speak. He let out a guttural roar of primal fear and rage, and threw his entire weight against the wall where he thought the door should be. The sound of splintering wood was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A sliver of dim, heavenly light from the hallway sliced into the darkness. I scrambled towards it, joining Joe. We hit the door together, shoulder to shoulder, our combined mass finishing what he had started. The damaged frame gave way with a final, sickening crack, and we tumbled out into the hallway, landing in a heap on the carpet. We didn't look back into the blackness of Exam 3. We didn't speak. We scrambled to our feet and ran. We ran past the empty waiting room, past the smiling family posters, out the front door we'd left swinging open. We didn't stop until we were locked inside the SUV, the engine screaming as Joe peeled out of the parking lot. The official report was a masterpiece of plausible denial. Vandalism, a broken door, a sick, personalized prank that had spooked 2 guards. The clinic owner found no file, no evidence of anyone else ever being there. The motion sensor logs were mysteriously wiped clean. Case closed. But Joe Goins, the cynical ex-cop who believed in nothing, was a broken man. He put in for a permanent transfer to days and refused to ever work with a partner again. The one time I saw him in the break room, he looked straight through me, his eyes hollow. He never spoke of that night. For a week, I tried to pretend it was over. I slept with the lights on. I jumped at every sound. But the true horror wasn't in the memory. It was in the future. It's 2 a.m. on a Tuesday now. My phone sits on the nightstand. Its screen dark. I haven't slept in 36 hours. I'm just waiting. This afternoon, my new patrol schedule arrived via email. I didn't want to open it. When I did, my heart didn't just sink. It plummeted into a void. There it was, highlighted in the company's cheerful blue and white template. Robertson, Jason A. Solo inspection. West Side Medical Clinic. The date listed is for next week. The time slot is from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. My appointment isn't a memory. It's a shift assignment. The horror wasn't a one-time event. It's a condition of my employment, written into the roster with bureaucratic indifference. So I sit here, in the silence of my apartment, waiting for 3:15 a.m. to pass. The diagnosis wasn't a prediction. It was an invitation. And I am now, forever, a patient waiting for his next assessment. The dark shift is never over. It just reschedules. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to know the truth, no matter how terrifying. Only people who bury their past diagnoses and ignore their own vulnerabilities would let something like this go on. Don't be like the clinic owners who swept it all under the rug. Subscribe if you stand for facing your fears. And if you think every patient deserves a fair assessment, comment. Some appointments should be missed.